Tonight's topic has come about because of Lisa. Basically because Lisa heard me always mentioning Whitehead. And that also comes up, other folks may have, but I never really expound upon Whitehead. I commonly allude to Jean Gebser as well, and we've had presentations here on Gebser, and we've had other alliances with this group and the Gebser Society, of which Lisa and I are executives, meaning Lisa is treasurer and I'm secretary. And we're planning our conference for next year, by the way, and it looks like it's going to be in New Mexico, but that's Gebser. I've never presented on Whitehead here, and I don't think I've ever presented on Whitehead anywhere. I can't think of it. And one of the reasons being Whitehead is challenging, and the very prospect of introducing Whitehead in 2 hours, and that is if we have no discussion, is formidable and impossible. But, you know, whatever Lisa suggests,
Lisa gets.
I always do. I know better. Resistance is futile. I always know in any book I'm reading, if Whitehead is mentioned, it's a good thing. It makes me feel good, and it makes me feel good about the author. I don't often check indexes because Whitehead appears in so few of them outside the Whitehead community. I check for Jung, I check for Gebser. Generally speaking, interestingly, Ian McGilchrist does mention Whitehead from time to time. And he also mentions Matt Siegel. I'll mention Matt Siegel later. I will try to be coherent and cogent. It will be hard. Harder than usual, because it's so vast. To consider Whitehead is really vast. It is unimaginable to me to go back to a pre-Whitehead existence in my life, as would be true as well with Jung, Gebser, and so many others that I would say life-changing fellow human beings. Whitehead's thought is continually interweaving with my thoughts and feelings and perceptions, as with others. I am continually thinking how many young folks could benefit from Jean Gebser, and there are some advances in that regard with efforts to bring Gebser into communion with the Jung communities. I, of course, am often also thinking that Gebser folks could benefit from Jung, and I'm thinking that all could benefit from Alfred North Whitehead. A quick aside on Jung and Whitehead. Jung was 14 years younger than Whitehead. Whitehead was born in 1861. And a side note also for some of you who watched the recent documentary film on Christiana Morgan, I was very pleased and surprised, and I can't go into that since some of you don't have that context. We can talk later if you want to know more about this documentary and Christiana Morgan, a very important figure in Jung's life. But she also was a friend of Alfred North Whitehead and his wife. She called him Alfie. Whitehead died in 1947. We'll make that more relevant. Of course, Jung then died in 1961. In my waking hours, when I have my morning anxieties, which I refer to as sensitivities to light, and often they come before light, before dawn, and I wake up with my anxieties, which I've traced to various functions of the lower brainstem. But at any rate, I go through my discipline of working with that, and I have come to various practices of learning that it is good to learn, and I feel that I am always learning, and I feel that we can all always be learning from Jung, James Hillman, Marion Woodman, from folks who are on this call right now, and many published people in this circle at the moment, always learning from Whitehead. And so Lisa referring me back to Whitehead has been a profound synchronicity for me. Several portals have opened, so it's a meaningful coincidence, I suppose. I'm always learning from Jean Gipser, from Sri Aurobindo, and shall we all make a list of everyone from whom we feel we are learning in sort of explicit ways. Last fall, the Gipser Society conference in San Francisco, which we helped plan, was at California Institute of Integral Studies, had the theme of the emergence of integral consciousness. Jean Gipser, Sri Aurobindo, Carl Jung, and Teilhard de Chardin. And it was a wonderful conference. If you want to take a look at it, we have a few hundred extra programs. But I was thinking we could very easily have made it Gipser, Aurobindo, Jung, Teilhard, and Whitehead, and should have. But the fact is, there are only a certain number of folks who are in sort of the Whitehead universe of discourse, which is an active universe of discourse. There are conferences, there are convenings. I'm not a direct participant in any of those, although I've been in Whitehead organizations, including the Center for Process Studies at Claremont, and a group called Process and Faith. We'll talk a bit more about that later. Process is the key word. Whitehead's great work is Process and Reality. This is the corrected edition. The original edition had so many mistakes that it was almost impossible to get through the mistakes because Whitehead refused to read galleys. He said he just didn't have time for it. So there are typos, there are grammatical breaks, there are non sequiturs in the original version, which we have in our library, if any of you are game for it.
It's the only one we have.
The only copy, only Whitehead we have, which is a shame. But this is the corrected edition. However, I rush to say I have not read this book and I have no intention to read it. It is highly technical, as all agree. I'm just not up to Whitehead's speed. We have to read in his technical work. Whitehead was a great mathematician, first of all. He wrote with Bertrand Russell the Principia Mathematica, a foundational work in mathematical theory that opened up several avenues of further thought. As a footnote, and I have lots of anecdotes about Whitehead, Whitehead and Russell had to pay for that Principia to be published. They couldn't find a publisher who was willing to invest in publishing the Principia. So it was a self-published work.
Just as an aside, maybe a synchronicity.
Uh-huh.
In the library, the Whitehead was next to Bertrand Russell.
Oh, Whitehead is next to Bertrand Russell. Very good.
On the shelf.
Very good. Very good. Well, there are no accidents, right? I
fell behind the books.
I just found this book, which would be sort of the only book, sort of, that I would recommend for follow-up. It's called a Whitehead Word Book, a glossary with alphabetical index of technical terms in process and reality. It's by John Cobb. It's very good. I've started it, and I start books and I think, I should not highlight or underline. That usually doesn't last much more than an hour. And then so I've already started highlighting it. And I have a whole box full of Whitehead books here, his books and others. And you'll note they're not only highlighted and underlined, they have tabs, and it's just really, really done up. And there are more books at home. So it was daunting to enter this process, but I'm very glad we're doing it. So some patience may be required. This is not a formal lecture or presentation, so I just gave that up. I'm not necessarily concerned that we're going from A to B to C to D, but there is some coherence, I hope. A common maxim of my life is trusting the process. Trust the process. I've probably told 5,000 adolescents to trust the process in my teaching career. I don't know how well that has worked out in every case, but trusting the procession, and that word is going to come up a lot. Reverencing the processes. Whitehead would certainly urge us to reverence the processes. I reverence the processes with prayer and gratitude. And again, we are always learning from each and every one of you present and connecting here tonight in whatever dimension, at whatever scale of magnitude. We are being changed, and we are in process, whether we know it or not, whether we're conscious or not, whether we like it or not. This is what it is. This is Whitehead. All is process. This is dialogue, but it's also multi-log. So that it's hardly simply my stream of words. No matter what you are thinking, if you are thinking seriously enough, if you have to think so seriously, then Whitehead can be helpful. He can be helpful, I promise you. But he takes work. Jung requires work. We cannot expect Whitehead's inflection in all of his work up to his death in 1947 to be inflected in terms of 2024. Jung's language cannot always be inflected to 2024, and it actually gets a little irritating to me sometimes when folks expect Jung to be up to speed with 2024 inflection when, he died in 1961. I mean, give him a break, that far anyway. Aurobendo's language can be really difficult to connect with, and he wrote in English, but you have to want to meet him, you have to want to connect with him. Teilhard de Chardin can be difficult enough. Whitehead has a number of fallacies we will be bringing up, but among them is the fallacy, which means a wrong way of thinking. Doesn't mean a falsehood, it means a wrong way of thinking, a wrong attitude. That's a fallacy. And he speaks of the fallacy of the perfect dictionary. There is no perfect dictionary. There will never be a perfect dictionary, we might surmise. But all of these folks mentioned thus far are fellow human beings. They all have statements to make, and all the many, many others who we could add to the list, all the folks we read and listen to. We can hear them. We can come close to them. They can come close to us in the mysterious ways that the dead are present to the living. We can experience dialogue, trialogue, multilogue. Jean Gebser says, I try to learn from everything that happens to me. That's a good yoga. I try to learn from everything that happens to me. This week it was car repairs. It was an adventure. In a Whiteheadian expression, our varying perspectivities bring forth oneness out of manyness, right now, right here. And this oneness that is emerging with our manyness adds another oneness. This is a novelty. Novelty is a very big word with Whitehead, and he loves to capitalize his big words. It's lovely, with a capital L. Novelty with a capital N. Novelty is central in Whitehead's philosophy, and that is we can experience newness. We are not imprisoned. We are not fixed. He also uses the term creative advance. We'll dance through some of these again as we move along. So I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I'm curious as to who doesn't know anything at all about Whitehead, barring what we've just done. Then, okay. All right, well, okay. We got a show of hands anyway. Well, that's great. Then there may be folks who know a little bit about Whitehead. A little bit.
How about a lot?
And then I'm gonna say, what about those who know a lot about Whitehead?
One.
Well, I got that out of the way because if I say something wrong, and there's somebody here who knows a lot about Whitehead, please feel free to say so, to correct me. It helped me. It's an infinite task, and I've read and studied Whitehead so long, and have so many anecdotal, he's a wonderfully anecdotally oriented person, that sometimes I don't remember if I've read it or if I'm just making it up.
I get that.
Here's something I just reread in this wonderful book, The Dialogues of Alfred North Whitehead, which, like Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, this book consists of dialogues with Whitehead recorded by his good friend, Lucian Price, who carefully recorded their regular social sessions. And then Whitehead read it and approved it. He said, you got it. And as you read it, one may have the sense that Lucian Price was a very attentive listener and a careful note taker. It's a wonderful book. It's in some ways a good intro to Whitehead, I suppose. But Lucian Price asked Whitehead, how old were you when you first felt a sense of conscious mastery of your subject? I have never felt it at all, Whitehead answered. Then Lucian Price says, then I have asked my question clumsily. Perhaps what I was trying to ask was, when did you first begin to feel an adequacy to your work? Whitehead said, I have never felt adequate to it. Good heavens, his wife said. Don't I know? Not a year went by bringing back September and the resumption of his teaching that he didn't have a bad case of the jitters. So I felt better about my jitters. Famously, Whitehead greeting students, and he taught in England, and then he taught at Harvard in the final phase of his life. All very interesting. But his common greeting, and I just love it, think about it, would be, What have you been doing? Pretty good philosophical question. Terms for Whitehead, importance. For Whitehead, importance is an important word describing reality. How do we experience importance? I'd love to use it all the time, even at this table, to say, well, I think that's important. Or, is that important? Is that less important? Whitehead likes that term. He likes the term relevance. Adventure, with a capital A. Beauty, all of these initial caps. Creativity, which he takes as a divine attribute, a divine property. Creativity. Creative advance. Advance. Novelty. Just a sec. I've got it all organized. Okay, in Adventures of Ideas, which I think is a splendid first read for Whitehead, but his final, part 4, civilization, and for Whitehead uses the term civilization to mean a highly accomplished organization of society. He's not saying that it's an unmixed phenomenon, but under the section for civilization, the chapters are truth, beauty, truth and beauty, adventure, and peace. We'll have a statement about peace coming up. So here we are as of February 1st, 2024. I was stunned this morning to flip the calendars to February 1st. I don't know what happened to January. And then I thought, but it must be February 1st because the Whitehead presentation is tonight. A note that February 29th, we're going to take up the discussion of temporics on that very weird day, February 29, in this most propitious and formidable year of 2024. Okay, Lisa, slide number 1, please.
Okay, while I get that up, I'm gonna share something I learned about leap day.
Okay.
So, you know, it happens not only every slide, the first slide is the field of.
No.
No?
The first slide is the James Webb.
Oh, right.
Ah, there we go.
But if you're gonna do something else, do that first.
Okay, so, not only do we have leap day once every 4 years, I found out today that, if it happens in what leap day doesn't account fully for the time, you know, 365.25.
Right.
In years that are divisible by 400, you have a leap day. But in century years, like 2000, 2100,
An extra leap
2200.
day?
Well, yeah.
So 30 days in February every 400 years?
No, you have it, but like in the year 2100, you wouldn't have it because it's not divisible by 400.
Oh.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Perfectly appropriate. And it is an introduction to our February 29 discussion of temporics. all this time reckoning is not as absolute as we often are forced to think. This is a recent photograph from the James Webb instrument. Some of you may have seen it. That is the deepest field image yet to exist to human consciousness. The image is created by light that has traveled 13.2 billion years. So we're approaching the earlier time of our universe. There are about 5,000 galaxies in that image. And so right away, we deal with the paradox that we are just now, the future is bringing us the past, if we think of it that way. So the light has been traveling to us since the early universe. And now we can perceive these images. I looked up the word organic, since we're talking about the philosophy of organism, and the root, I spent I was up late last night just exploring the etymology of organic. Organic is actually from ergon, energy. The root of organic is the Greek ergon, energy. And that goes into many interesting directions if you follow that etymological journey on out. So energy, if we're talking about the philosophy of organism, we are talking in the sense of the philosophy of energy, and something is happening energically as we perceive this image. How can we even perceive it, understand it, process it? How does it change our lives? Well, no two of us would have the same answer to those questions. Okay, slide number 2, please. A little time travel. No, not that one, no.
Which
No.
one?
It's the first of the media, that one, and how. Okay, I first heard Marshall McLuhan when I was 16 years old. I'm now 73 years old. And I heard McLuhan in a recording of the book, The Medium is the Massage. Can you remove the bar that's blocking out the words?
I think it's only, oops.
Well, it's no big deal.
Hang on.
Okay, there we go. Oh. We just want to see the words.
Okay.
So this is from the copy of that book that I purchased in the summer of 1967 after a near-death experience. And this was probably the first time I ever saw the name Whitehead. The major advances in civilization are processes that all but wreck the societies in which they occur. Now, Whitehead's language of advances, we've said, is specific. Civilization is specific, referring to a state of organization. And societies is also specific. It's a very expansive sense of societies. But 1967, of course, Whitehead was writing this before that. The major, in the 20th century, the major advances in civilization are processes that all but wreck the societies in which they occur. Well, when I was reading that at age 16, I had no idea what was going to happen, what is happening today.
So, John, to paraphrase that, is he saying that societies evolve to destroy themselves?
That's a suitable approach to take, and that is the relationship of creation and destruction. That connects to discussions we have here quite often. Destruction as the source of coming to be. But I want to get to a major end point that I woke up with this morning, which is integrating, disintegrating.
I just wanted to share a beautiful quote I found by the poet Robert Browning. Out of the wreckage I rise.
Yes, yes, yes.
Out of the wreckage I rise.
Well, there was another wise person who made a statement that only when the kernel of wheat dies in the soil can it produce much fruit, great fruit, multitudes of fruitfulness. Let's an important term for Whitehead, a major addition to the model, is that Whitehead brings perishing into his model. It basically does not exist elsewhere in the Western philosophical modeling, and that is death, dying, perishing, disintegrating. This is the perhaps the most important topic we can be discussing in 2024.
Modeling what?
What?
Modeling of what?
Reality.
They didn't include death?
Death has never been a major topic
Interesting.
in the Western philosophical tradition. As it's just a closed door, a portal that's not been walked through, as unapproachable. No one can answer the after death question, so philosophy
So
can't treat it.
Okay.
But Whitehead does treat it, but he treats it at various scales of magnitude. So rather than to say simply life and death as a binary oppositionality, living and dying for Whitehead are always occurring at all scales of magnitude all the time. It's true for all of us in this room right now. I mean, you know, the contemporary science certainly shows that. All of our bodies are, all of our cells, which most of them are not human cells anyway, but the cells are continually coming to the end of their cycle and dying and being reorganized. The energy is in transformation, so that the term Whitehead uses is perishing. We can talk about perishing, and in fact, it's very important to do so right now, in the year 2024 and in the coming decades. There's a lot of perishing going on at the scale of extinction, apocalyptic scales, or is that an abstraction to say apocalyptic? Is that expressing something we're feeling? What is the reality of the expression apocalyptic? Are we talking about perishing on a very large scale? Well, I think yes, that's what we're talking about.
An interpretation.
An interpretation, perishing on a large scale.
And didn't World War I figure into Whitehead's bringing that forward into his philosophy?
Coming right up, stay tuned.
Oh.
Okay.
Good pickup.
This is where Jung, of course, is speaking to us of the spirit of the times, the spirit of the times, and the spirit of the depths, as he says in the Red Book. That's certainly applicable to our encounter with Whitehead. Let's go to the next slide. Still from the medium is the massage.
This one?
No. This one is just a section of prose text.
Oh, right, yeah. Where did it go? Oh, hang on.
There it is. That's the one with the fingerprint.
Something is really kind of, oops, I didn't mean to do that. It's kind of wacky with Zoom today.
Well, we'll trust the process.
Okay, what is going on here?
It's really hanging on to that picture.
It really likes the
Okay.
one with the, yeah, I think I'm just gonna close that one because it seems to always want to go back to it.
Okay, that one
See,
there, that's
yeah.
the one we want.
Right, I know that, that's the one we want,
Oh,
right, but
Eureka!
no, it's not
It's okay.
sharing
No,
yet.
it's not sharing.
Okay, I've gotta get it onto screen share.
What?
Here we go.
All of these were sent out earlier today, if some of you may have gotten them.
There we go.
by your email.
All right.
Okay.
Oh. Okay.
Okay, so this is to encourage us in our deliberations this evening. Still from Medium is the Message. In the study of ideas, it is necessary to remember that insistence on hard-headed clarity issues from sentimental feeling, as it were a mist, cloaking the perplexities of fact. Insistence on clarity at all costs is based on sheer superstition as to the mode in which human intelligence functions. Our reasonings grasp at straws for premises and float on gossamers for deduction.
So if you're insisting on clarity, you just don't get it.
You're experiencing at hard-headed clarity. I would say it would be a fixity if it's become an obsession, and we could call that a complex if we wanted to take a psychological route.
So is this a statement sort of contra the logical positivists?
Yes.
I was just gonna say that too.
I think probably a direct comment to some of his brethren in the logical positivist persuasion. Persuasion is a big word for Whitehead, by the way. And he furthermore says, there remains the final reflection how shallow, puny, and imperfect are efforts to sound the depths in the nature of things. In philosophical discussion, the merest hint of dogmatic certainty as to the finality of a statement is an exhibition of folly.
Yes.
So as we often experience at this table, to say, we're not trying to find the last word. We're not trying to nail it all down. It's all been brought to closure. Questions are all answered. You'll be examined and issued a grade and perhaps a diploma. Okay, next slide, if we can. Of course, Whitehead, and as McLuhan is citing him, talk about James Joyce. We're talking, no, that's not the one, that's not the one, that's not the one.
It's nice.
Okay, the one with the earth, moon, there,
Oh, here we go.
second, there we go.
That one, okay.
This is the last one from 1967.
Oh, there we go, yeah. It wants to block out the words.
What just happened?
Something inconsistent.
It is the business of the future to be dangerous.
Yeah, perhaps I'll just say it, we won't bother with that.
Here we go, okay.
Now, when I first saw this at age 16, now can we remove the,
It'll go away on its own.
Really?
are you suggesting that we trust the process here?
I don't know about trusting my life to Zoom.
There were no pictures of the Earth from space, of the Earth in color, or the images that were taken in the Apollo mission in 1968.
Yeah.
So this was an early lunar image, and you see it was no more clear than that, but it was quite advanced, and to me, quite thrilling and perplexing. And then Whitehead's statement, and at age 16, I wasn't sure how I could take this, or how it is the business of the future to be dangerous. Now that's taken out of context in some ways from the book Science and the Modern World, but it's one that we will keep in mind as we move along with the complementarities of integrating, disintegrating. The spirit of our times. How do we integrate disintegration? All right, now we're going to have a little breather, and we're going to let Professor Whitehead speak for himself, as Paul has generously agreed to read from Whitehead's biographical statement. And I think you'll find it interesting. So here is Whitehead introducing himself.
This is a fairly long quotation, as you can see. And
relax.
if some of you are better at some of the pronunciation in Southern England, I'm not sure where the French pronunciation would come in and versus the English, because as you know from history, they are totally overlapping. This is Whitehead speaking, of course, from his autobiography. I was born in 1861, February 15th, at Ramsgate in the Isle of Thanet, Kent. The family, grandfather, father, uncles, brothers, engaged in activities concerned with education, religion, and local administration. My grandfather, born of yeoman stock in Isle of Sheppey, was probably a descendant of Quaker George Whitehead, whom George Fox in his journal mentions as living there in the year 1670. In the year 1815, my grandfather, Thomas Whitehead, at the age of 21, became head of a private school in Ramsgate, Isle of Thanet, to which my father, Alfred Whitehead, succeeded at the correspondingly early age of 25 in the year 1852. They were, both of them, most successful schoolmasters, but my grandfather was by far the more remarkable man. About 1860, my father was ordained as a clergyman of the Anglican Church, and about 1866 or 1867, he gave up his school for clerical duty, first in Ramsgate, and later in 1871, he was appointed vicar of St. Peter's Parish, a large district, mostly rural, with its church about 2 or 3 miles from Ramsgate. He remained there till his death in 1898. He became influential among the clergy of East Kent, occupying the offices of Rural Dean, Honorary Canon of Canterbury, and Proctor in Convocation for the diocese. But the central fact of his influence was based on his popularity with the general mass of the population in the island. He never lost his interest in education and daily visited his 3 parochial schools for infants, for girls, and for boys. As a small boy, before I left home for school in 1875, I often accompanied him. He was a man with local interests and influence, apart from an understanding of such provincial figures, the social and political history of England in the 19th century cannot be comprehended. England was governed by the influence of personality. This does not mean intellect. My father was not intellectual, but he possessed personality. Archbishop Tate had his summer residence in the parish, and he and his family were close friends of my parents. He and my father illustrated the survival of the better and recessive side of the 18th century. Thus, at the time, unconsciously, I watched the history of England by my vision of grandfather, father, Archbishop Tate, and others. When the Baptist minister in the parish was dying, it was my father who read the Bible to him. Such was England in those days, guided by local men with strong mutual antagonisms and intimate community of feeling. This vision was one source of my interest in history and in education. Another influence in the same direction was the mass of archaeological remains with their interest in beauty. Canterbury Cathedral, with its splendor and its memories, was 16 miles distant. As I now write, I can visualize the very spot where Becket fell, AD 1170, and can recall my reconstruction of the incident in my young imagination. But closer to my home, within the island or just beyond its borders, English history had left every type of relic. There stood the great walls of Richborough Castle, built by the Romans, and the shores of Ebbe's Fleet, where the Saxons and Augustan landed. A mile or so inland was the village of Minster, with its wonderful abbey church, retaining some touches of Roman stonework, but dominated by its glorious Norman architecture. On this spot, Augustine preached his first sermon. Indeed, the island was furnished with Norman and other medieval churches built by the Minster monks. My father's church was one of them, with a Norman nave. Just beyond Richborough is the town of Sandwich. At the time, it retained the 16th and 17th centuries, with its Flemish houses lining the streets. Its town records state that in order to check the silting up of the harbor, the citizens invited skillful men from the Low Countries, quote, cunning in waterworks. Unfortunately, they failed, so that the town remained static from that period. In the last half century, it has been revived by a golf course, one of the best in England. I feel a sense of profanation amidst the relics of the Romans, the Saxons, of Augustine, the medieval monks, and the ships of the Tudors and the Stuarts. Golf seems rather a cheap ending to the story. How appropriate for our current situation. At the age of 14, in the year 1875, I was sent to school at Sheridan in Dorsetshire, at the opposite end of southern England. Here the relics of the past were even more obvious. In this year, 1941, the school is to celebrate its 1200th anniversary. It dates from St. Alton and claims Alfred the Great as a pupil. The school acquired the monastery buildings, and its grounds are bounded by one of the most magnificent abbeys in existence, with tombs of Saxon princes. In my last 2 years there, the abbot's room, as was believed, was my private study, and we worked under the sound of the abbey bells, brought from the field of the cloth of gold by Henry VIII. I have written thus far in order to show by example how the imaginative life of the Southern English professional class during the last half of the 19th century was molded. My own experience was not in the least bit exceptional. Of course, details differ, but the type was fairly uniform for provincial people.
Next slide.
Some of the things that he has just written about.
So as I was reading that very rich textural, autobiographical, textural text, and he spoke of the fields of gold and Henry VIII, and I thought, I have no idea. So of course, a quick Google search, or I shouldn't, online search led to this painting, which I then immediately sent to Gregory, because the fields of gold referred to a summit conference between Henry VIII, who is shown in the lower left,
Yeah.
There it is.
and Francis I of France, who happened also, by the way, to be king when Jean Calvin published his Institutes of Christian Religion.
Is it this guy?
Uh,
He's the only other one.
Yeah, it
Well,
must be, he's
let's see.
smaller.
But I don't think they would have not have been in the same procession, and Henry would not have been in front, so I don't know. I mean, I looked up the story, and, you know, there's interesting things there if you fractal into it. There were lots of steps taken to make sure that everything was on equal ground, including grading the ground to be equally flat. And then, but the fields of gold referred to the unlimited effort on both parts of both kings to show their wealth. And thus the word was cloth made of gold.
So like these,
Yeah, yeah. As Gregory says, what did you say, Gregory, about dating?
Old-fashioned dating that didn't end in good friendship. Or the friendship didn't last.
Yeah.
Because it was after the 100 Years' War, and well, it's sort of illustrated an attempt from England and France to come closer together. As this territory, which is the very northern tip of France, was one of the latest contested territory, and eventually it went back to France, but and there were wars after that.
So it's a part of Whitehead's autobiographical text. As he said, he had his feelings for the fields of gold. And as I looked at this image, again, no two people in this room had the same two responses to this image, but I submit it with reference to my own feelings of an intact world, should we say? What is represented here that Whitehead is alluding to, and that how do worlds form? How does civilization form? And there we see a lot of formality. Whitehead uses the term conformity. There's a lot of conformity there. It strikes me here, this is actually quite similar to Jung's painting on page 125 in the Red Book, of where a society is shown as it is configured with all of its sub-elements, page 125 in the Red Book. And this sort of reminds me of the scene that Jung paints at the bottom of that drawing. And it's, so how do we find ourselves in a world, or today, how do we experience civilization?
I thought that you were going to present that image to illustrate science.
Signs?
Because it feels like this is what it is. I mean, not only the painting, but this event was meaningful only because of basically their objective to beam this wealth and this power it's more than the encounter or the objects that were there. Those were basically the beaming, the beamed meaning of their kingship that was displayed a little bit like today. We would basically show statues like driving a specific car, or I don't know. It's the idea of like science beyond the objects.
Such as
Roland Barthes, or
a
maybe
golf
it's Whitehead
tournament on the
evening.
Monterey Peninsula, maybe.
This weekend, yes, right
This
now.
weekend, visible displays of wealth and power as elements of civilization.
Oh, but that's golf. That's a
Oh,
poor ending to this.
A cheap ending to the story, he says, but let's take the story
Well,
further.
Can I ask one more question
Go
here?
ahead.
Because, I mean, you presented this as a sort of orderly society, a kind of almost realistic depiction, but I'm looking at this dragon in the upper left-hand corner going, what is that doing there?
It's like a map dragon. It's not real.
Well, I know it's not real, but I mean, this isn't a map.
Well,
I
there's
mean,
no
maybe-
fire
Golf
either.
course on top of this?
Here's page 120, drawing 125,
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
and Jung's,
John's favorite drawing.
it
Yes.
is, in the whole book. So Jung has his whole society, and it's very complex, you have to look into this drawing, it's not simple, it's not romantic, it's very
No, it's
detailed
scary.
and full of perplexity. And we won't go into that now. And this was from a dream Jung had just before the First World War. So let us segue. Whitehead was always alive, not aloof. He never stood for Parliament, and he loathed publicity, but he did a good deal of political speaking in his Cambridge years. Rotten eggs and oranges were effective party weapons, and I have often been covered with them. he said.
Oh.
Okay. Stability, which is, and this is this author writing, is as important as adventure for new achievements of thought. Whitehead speaks to stability. Stability showed itself in Whitehead's long-term academic positions, and from the east of England to London and to Harvard, in his constant devotion to his students, in his family life. He insisted that his wife had a fundamental effect upon his outlook on the world, especially on that part of it that had to do with the importance of beauty, moral, and aesthetic. And there was tragedy. A whole generation of his English pupils was nearly wiped out in the First World War. His younger son, Eric, an aviator, was killed at age 19. It gives me chills. I'm so concerned with this era of history that I am actually experiencing
I
chills
wanted
right
to
now.
interject there. I heard that he actually celebrated the death of his son and said that it was a good death. And I was wondering if you knew any more about that.
Never heard that. I don't know. I'd have to bring it up. I'd have to see it. In 1956, Bertrand Russell wrote about the 1918 death of Whitehead's younger son, Eric, in the war. Quote, this is Russell, "The pain of this loss had a great deal to do with turning his thoughts to philosophy, away from mathematics, you might say, and with causing him to seek ways of escaping from belief in a merely mechanistic universe." So, I don't know. Bring that source out. I'd like to see it.
Okay.
Yeah. But whatever, however he took it, it was a turning point, and it's a turning point in world life that is with us today, and that is the First World War.
Can I take this down?
You can. So Whitehead says, in his philosophy of organism, or ergon, or energy, everything is connected to everything. So that's where he gets to. But how, is my question. Everything is interconnected for Whitehead. All life has value. Non-human entities are also experiencing subjects for Whitehead. Okay. Onward into the basic philosophy of organism. For Whitehead, reality is made of a world of facts and a world of values at all scales of magnitude. This is probably the single most important element of Whitehead that comes to me always in discussions in various venues, groups that I belong to, where values are brought up, and we'll stay with the term values for the moment, but they're brought up as if values are the term I'm looking for is not coming to me, an attribute of reality, an emergent quality of reality, apperception, as it were, something extra, something that comes at a certain level. Not so for Whitehead. Value, or the value component, is present at all scales of magnitude of reality. As he calls it also, and this links very much with Jung, I feel, Whitehead uses the description of a physical polarity and a mental polarity at all scales of magnitude in all dimensions. I think instead of Whitehead's word mental, if we were to do the interdisciplinary work, I think we could say psychic. A physical polarity and a psychic polarity, which is, of course, where Jung worked so in earnest with Wolfgang Pauli. And in fact, I think, if anything, a great deal of Jung and Pauli's efforts could have been expedited if they had known Whitehead. But who's to know?
Who's to,
Who's to know? So let's start with Whitehead's physical polarity, if we look at it in this way, and that is his atomic unit. To stay with the word atom for a moment, from the Greek, which is made of the prefix a, plus tom or toma, and which means to split, to sever. So an atom means the indivisible. It can't be divided. And so the quest from early Greek philosophy, in various philosophers, in a quest for the atom. One might say this quest reached its culmination on July 16th, 1945 in Alamogordo, New Mexico, or perhaps somewhat earlier, when it was shown that the atom as it had been conceived was in fact divisible. And energy was involved in this process. But for Whitehead, his concern is not just with particle physics. For him, the atomic unit is what he calls an actual occasion, or equally, an actual entity. And that is something that exists in actuality, something that we experience in our actual lives, or that we can experience, is possible to experience in our actual lives. The smallest unit of our actual experience is an actual occasion. And if it exists in space-time, although I don't want to use that word too loosely, it's an actual entity or an actual thing. Yes?
So does this mean that he is shifting the field of reality from physicality to meaning?
Yes. And I think David Bohm takes right up on this. When Bohm finds that reality is made of, and again, we're using the word reality here, we're just moving along with it, matter, energy, and meaning, as I recall with Bohm. Bohm still uses the word matter, which I find a little interesting. But
Could
you
you
know,
use the word relationality as well for meaning? A
for-
relational field?
certainly for Whitehead, Whitehead's is giving us a reality that is relational, radically relational, at all scales of magnitude in all dimensions.
So you might say that you're dealing here with an entity or occasion or event that is psychophysical. It isn't purely physical. This is what Whitehead was against, seeing everything in purely physical terms. But it isn't purely psychical either. It is a union of subject and object, or psyche and matter, that constitutes the actual occasion. And here's where I think, if I may add, here's where I think Jung can help Whitehead. Because in Process and Reality, Whitehead's magnum opus, the relationship between subject and object is, I won't say dualistic, but let me say more dualistic than Jung's paradoxical union of opposites. So Jung appreciated paradox. He appreciated the paradox of psyche and matter. And looking at Whitehead in Process and Reality, in my reading of it, you don't quite have a union of subject and object. As David Ray Griffin, who was the translator of Process and Reality, his formula, according to Griffin, Whitehead's formula was subject, then object. So they're juxtaposed, they're right next to each other. In one part of the polarity, you have subject, and the subject then perishes and becomes objectified. But you don't have the union, the Jungian union, the paradoxical union, the alchemical union of subject and object in Whitehead. And that's my main gripe. I love Whitehead. I loved what he wrote in Modes of Thought, which was published about 9 years after Process and Reality. And he did a splendid job there of questioning a rigidified objectivism of science, of philosophy, bringing out the importance of feeling, the importance of bringing subjectivity into the picture. But I think I'd love to see a marriage of Jung and Whitehead, where the Whiteheadian would accept that the union of subject and object is a paradoxical, Kleinian kind of interpenetration. They're not just sitting next to each other in the actual occasion. Subject and object are interpenetrating each other. If we brought a Jungian sensibility to Whitehead's formulation.
So Steve, do you think that Whitehead has gotten to the point of the Necker cube, but not quite to the Klein bottle?
I don't think he made it to the Necker cube either, because the Necker cube is just, as I see it, just a lower dimensional version of the Mobius and the Klein bottle. The Necker cube is also paradoxical if you can view the two perspectives of the cube simultaneously rather than one after the other. But there's a way of viewing the cube where you can see opposing perspectives as interpenetrating each other. You have a kind of perspectival integration. And then the topological counterpart of that is the Mobius and the Klein bottle.
I think it might illuminate my sense, Steve, of this, of what you've just said, of which we have spoken before. For Whitehead, aperspectivity is an attribute of God. so that we humans don't experience a perspectival consciousness. Only God experiences the perspectival. I would love to see a marriage, yes, and I would love to see more people working on it. But what Whitehead offers here with his languaging of process, I think can be very helpful. And his term nexus, and that is how actual occasions, and I've always preferred the expression actual occasion to actual entity. That's just a personal bias on my part.
Great.
But however, I think that's completely amenable to quantum physics. The finding that we're not looking for things, we're looking for events. We're looking for what is happening in the various nexus, where actual occasions are, as you would say, interpenetrating and forming societies of relationships, again at all scales, in the web of life, which also brings us to archetypal process, which is one way that has been approached with this, you mentioned David Ray Griffin, his book, Archetypal Process, Self and Divine in Whitehead, Jung, and Hillman. So there's some fruitful stuff in there. At this juncture, I would like to move along with joy to reference Whitehead's bringing in, guess who? James Clerk Maxwell. Whitehead completely embraced Maxwell, and as he said, he conceived the whole universe as, and this is a quote, Whitehead, a field of force, or in other words, a field of incessant activity. Now, for those who haven't journeyed with James Clerk Maxwell, almost everything we're experiencing in our lives today owes something to Maxwell's equations. Because Maxwell, an anecdote with Maxwell that I love, Maxwell had some graduate students who sent him a paper or some sort and spoke about their work and their working with matter. And Maxwell spoke back to them and said, well, you're going to have to, that doesn't work. He said, we never experience matter.
He would have said, there's only the field.
We only experience forces.
Yeah. Only
forces. And Whitehead embraces this as we could say, we cannot say of an electromagnetic event. And I think this is actually going to blur the subject-object dichotomy that you're seeing in Whitehead, but that's an ongoing discussion. We cannot say of an electromagnetic event that it is here in space and here in time, or here in space-time, in a perfectly definite sense, which does not require for its explanation any reference to other regions of space-time. In other words, there are no isolated events.
No,
the modification of the electromagnetic field at every point of space at each instant, owing to the past history of each electron, is another way of stating the same fact. In a certain sense, Whitehead says, this is his words, everything is everywhere at all times. In some sense or other, each happening is a factor in the nature of every other happening. That's his philosophy of organism. The fundamental concepts are activity and process. These are, right now I'm just speaking for Whitehead. The notion of self-sufficient isolation is not exemplified in modern physics. There are no essentially self-contained activities within limited regions. Nature is a theater for the interrelations of activities. All things change, the activities and their interrelations. in the place of a procession of spatial forms of externally related bits of matter, the procession has substituted the notion of the forms of process. It has thus swept away space and matter and has substituted the study of the internal relations within a complex state of activity. Thereby, modern philosophy has been ruined. It has oscillated in a complex manner between three extremes. There are the dualists, who accept matter and mind as on an equal basis, and the two varieties of monists, those who put mind inside matter and those who put matter inside mind. But this juggling with abstractions can never overcome the inherent confusion introduced by the ascription of misplaced concreteness to the scientific scheme. So that brings us to Whitehead's statement of the fallacy of misplaced concreteness, which he sees as the error of modern philosophy. Abstractions taken as concrete facts. More concrete facts are expressed, quote, under the guise of very abstract logical constructions, unquote. That the root of the modern philosophical confusions of scientific materialism and the progressive bifurcation of nature. Now, this is exactly where Jung and Pauli are digging in as well. Whitehead brings in the fallacy of simple location. I love it. Nothing is simply located anywhere, ever. And this is contra Newton, this is contra Descartes, mistakes the abstraction of unrelated bits of matter as the most concrete reality from which to explain the relatedness of nature. And Whitehead says that doesn't work. That's the fallacy of simple location. Okay. Now, somewhere in here, we are coming to Jung's notion or description, and in our work, of the unconscious, what we don't know, okay? Somewhere here is the cycloidal. Whitehead didn't have the term cycloidal. It's a difficult term, and that's because you were saying, Steve, where we no longer have the differentiation of mind and matter. We have psychophysics, and this is where we are. I would advance in this discussion, hopefully creatively advance, and here to rush to the for me, the culmination of our discussion is, and I feel this very deeply, and it's a feeling. So it's not the logic of all this. I can't possibly keep up with Whitehead's logic. You know, I'm not a professional philosopher. For Whitehead, philosophy is a technical profession. It is a technical task. And that's how he saw it. And that's why much of his work is not accessible to me, because I just can't go any further than I can go. But where I think we're arriving, the salience is the transformation of the God image. And here's where I see Whitehead and Jung married, if you will. This is the marriage that matters. Unfortunately, use the word
relevant?
matter. Pardon?
That's
That's relevant. That is important. That is vitally important. For Jung, I think there is no greater importance in Jung's work than the transformation of the God image in our times, indicated in the experience of the spirit of our times and the spirit of the depths, that the God of Newton is dead. What are the consequences of this with, shall we say, unbridled technology? Well, Whitehead offers us this, with this relationship of the atomic actual occasions and actual entities. And as he says, the best philosophy can do is to offer a system that has an internal coherency, that it holds together and is useful. There is no perfect dictionary. It is a mistaken concreteness to say, this philosophy has it, we got it down. Whitehead says, not gonna happen, not gonna happen. But he does bring into philosophy, in metaphysics, which is something of a dirty word in a lot of philosophy departments, he calls this the primordial nature of God. So this is to be spoken of. And he also speaks of the consequential nature of God. And then furthermore, that God experiences all of reality in a sentient manner, which he calls the superjective, not subjective or objective, but superjective. Okay. This leads to the notion that we have a relationship with God. We change as God changes, and we change God as God changes us. This is process theology. This is the Center of Process Studies at Claremont. Whitehead uses the term transmutation, which interestingly Gebser also uses, and that we are now experiencing a transmutation of consciousness on Earth. We have the task of integrating the disintegrating. I think with Whitehead and Jung, it's appropriate to speak not of containment, and that is, how can we contain the magnitude of perishing that we are now experiencing in world life? How can we contain this? It's increasingly in the front page of the New York Times, and that is apocalyptic anxiety, catastrophizing, particularly among young people, the difficulty of actually coping. Rather than containment, Whitehead offers process, trusting the process at all scales, with a different sense of God image. And I want to go next, and for our final movement, into the order-disorder paradox. Lisa?
Yeah, before you jump there, could you go back to those two modes of God? You went over those kind of fast, and I need a little more grounding in them. Could you say?
Most profound and transformative and transmutative, and that is, but it has its place in thought. It concerns religion. It concerns the church, whatever that might mean. It concerns any religion, anywhere, at any time. But that is, what if we, and Teilhard de Chardin is going to join our conversation here with his notion of the omega point. And that is the general don't lose your question, I'll try to get back to it. The Western tradition has tended to be obsessed with origins, with Aristotle's causalities of, what are they? Material, formal, efficient,
Final.
but not final. Final causality has been
Vanished.
rejected and banished from the academy because of its awful word, purpose. Can't talk about purpose. Our lives have no purpose, particularly since God is dead and no longer with us. I mean, this is the entire Nietzschean dilemma that Jung takes up and so many others take up. How do we get along without God? How do we get along without a sense of purpose? And then this is going to lead us into the critique of like, well, that's just a bunch of sentimental hocus pocus. God is dead, the church is dead, religion is dead, and we get into all the other folks, and you can make a list of names if you want. Daniel Dennett and others who will say time to snap out of it. get over the old romantic notion that life has meaning. David Bohm is going to take exception to that. Whitehead is going to take exception to that in this. He gives us the most profound notion of the consequential nature of God. It's not only origin, but it's also fulfillment. And that's what Whitehead calls satisfaction, a cosmic satisfaction. We can call it an entelechy.
God saw that it was good, and that was the end of the first day. God saw that it was good, and that was the end of, is that the satisfaction?
We can go to the first day, yes, as Nathan Schwartz-Salant, who I'm going to bring up in a minute, does, and that is what's going on the first day when light is divided from darkness. And why should we even be talking about this in the year 2024? Is this just sentimental claptrap and mytho-poetical fantasy? Or how do we contain life in the year 2024? Well, Whitehead is saying at all scales of magnitude, there is a procession. It is a procession that can't be limited to space-time. And we'll get into Whitehead's notions of temporics. I don't think he's not with Gibbser yet, as far as temporics are concerned, the atemporal, but he's doing some very good work. How are we going to live with the spirit of our times as the world catastrophe continues to intensify and accelerate? This is what I wake up to every morning, and I'm disturbed. I have difficulty going back to sleep. So here I'm going to bring in Nathan Schwartz-Salant and the order-disorder paradox, which has, for me, been a terrifying fact to consider. Nathan, whom Steve knew, and we also, this is Nathan's last book, which has a blurb by Steve on the back. The order-disorder paradox, understanding the hidden side of change in self and society. That's a pretty bold title. Nathan is working with the physics of entropy, and that all order is inextricably entwined with disorder. Now, help me out here, Steve. We can't create order without understanding that we are also creating disorder. And the more order we create, the more disorder we're creating, because the order cannot be fixed. Whitehead would be in total agreement. And yet, to make the leap with Whitehead, while the paradox cannot be eliminated, it's in the consequential nature of God where there is a ultimate meaning.
Right, that was one of the terms I wanted you to clarify. The consequential nature of God, and what was the other one?
Primordial.
Yeah, could you clarify this?
Well, it's basically alpha and omega. The beginning and the end. So we have, for Whitehead, we have beginnings and endings again at all scales of magnitude and all dimensions. That's always happening. It's the Kleinian twist. It's happening, and Steve, you do the work on that at all scales where there's continuous discontinuity.
Nathan brought that in as well.
Yeah.
The intertwining of order and disorder. He had an alchemical spin. So the container in this case would be no simple container, because no simple container, as you said, John, no simple container can contain the catastrophic energies we're currently coping with. An alchemical container, on the other hand, which is quite paradoxical, is not simply closed and trying to hold in the energies. It is both closed and open, so the energies are spilling out. And I think what Nathan was saying in his alchemical mode was the need to embrace that paradox.
Yeah.
And Jung was saying, we've got to embrace paradox. And in the embrace of paradox does require a kind of act of faith and trust. Because the human mind, in its intellectual mode, cannot absorb paradox. There was a Japanese philosopher, Tanabe Hajime, who wrote a book called The Philosophy of Metanoetics. So it has a sort, it's influenced by a form of Zen. And this philosopher really was saying what he spoke about was the intellect being pushed so far as a container that it crashes on the rocks of paradox. Intellect is undone in its confrontation with paradox. It confronts paradox, as in quantum mechanics. It cannot contain paradox in the ordinary way that we try to contain things since Newton and before. It's got to embrace it because it can't contain it in the usual way. And I see this, John, as another way of saying what you were saying, possibly. I don't know if you would accept it as a friendly corollary or not.
Well, thank you, Steve. My publisher was trying to talk me out of the title of my book, which was Embracing Paradox. And you just convinced me that I named it well.
I vote for your title. It was a great title.
Let's listen to Jeff Keel for a moment. I don't know if Jeff is still tuned in with us, but at any rate, in this newly published book just out, Our Uncertain World, Challenges and Opportunities in a Dark Time. Murray Stein is in here, Donald Kalshid, Joe Cambry, many others. But Jeff writes, the more we explore our cosmology of interconnectedness, the more we move from destructive stories of separation to creating a flourishing world for future generations. Ultimately, we enter this new cosmology out of love. Love for Earth and all her inhabitants. Whitehead will say, who also share subjectivity. In the end, we hope to reach the center of wholeness, arousing an inner light of wisdom, a light that provides us with a sense of stability amidst great uncertainty. Our task is to embody this illumination and to allow it to act through us. It is from this place of illuminated wisdom that actions heal our split with the natural world. There is no better time than now to explore this cosmology of wholeness, so let us begin the journey together. Whitehead will be very much a companion if we invite him, and I recommend that. Whitehead says, and such a passionate statement, he's a passionate man. I can see him visiting Christiana Morgan in her tower with Mrs. Whitehead. But here's Alti's comment at the end of Modes of Thought, also a very good entry for Whitehead if you're looking for one. He finishes the book, philosophy begins in wonder. He says that in several places. Philosophy begins in wonder. And at the end, when philosophic thought has done its best, the wonder remains. There have been added, however, some grasp of the immensity of things. Now, with a transmuted God image, we can entertain such notions. Paul, I'd like you to read this paragraph from Whitehead. Whitehead also speaks of peace. So this is a cold read. Paul had no warning. He can do it.
The peace that is here meant is a positive feeling which crowns the life and motion of the soul. It is hard to define and difficult to speak of. It is not a hope for the future, nor is it an interest in present details. It is a broadening of feeling due to the emergence of some deep metaphysical insight, unverbalized and yet momentous in its coordination of values. Its first effect is the removal of the stress of acquisitive feeling arising from the soul's preoccupation with itself. Thus, peace carries with it a surpassing of personality. There is an inversion of relative values. It is primarily a trust in the efficacy of beauty.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Could you send that out?
It says, it actually, again, I get chills, thank you, Paul, for reading that. I get chills if you read, I think, Modes of Thought, Nature Alive, which is, the civilized universe, forms of process. But then in his, beauty becomes a sacred expression for him. And he's to say, is that word important to you? Is what that word about? Is it of any value to you?
I think what resonates, and the word resonates in itself resonates with what I'm going to say, but in beauty, there is the idea of experiencing harmony and being in communion with. I think that's core of the contemplative mindset.
Mhm.
And I would make the link between, we talked about the alpha and the omega, the change of the Godhead. I would be more precise saying that it's not just the alpha and the omega, it's the immanence and the transcendence. It's almost like, it feels like what is changing fast is the realization that something can be both at the center of the subject and at the same time everywhere. Well, I'm just paraphrasing a little bit the holographic illustration from the beginning of the discussion tonight. But basically, when something, trying to make the conceptual leap, if something is both immanent and transcendent, now we are not looking anymore at a local, we are looking at what's happening. And look, what's better word to describe looking what's happening than experiencing. And I think that when previous the meeting with David, we were talking about like the end of measurements and with everything that's happening today. And maybe the post-measurement era is the experiential era. And so I think I see the link here with the contemplative mindset and beauty as understood as experiencing the harmony with the world.
For Whitehead, beauty is a divine attribute.
Well, he was influenced by Plato, right? So the beauty is part of the perfect forms, justice, beauty, and truth. And the beauty you mentioned is moral as well as aesthetic It's aesthetic
Aesthetic.
morality,
Yes,
it's beauty.
you couldn't put it in a better Whiteheadian way. Aesthetic morality. Whitehead also says his philosophy is an aesthetic philosophy, and I just, David, hold just 1 second so I can get this. Just to let you know what's happening, Matt Siegel's latest book, Crossing the Threshold, Etheric Imagination in the Post-Kantian Process Philosophy of Schelling and Whitehead, and Matt, who presented at Asilomar in 2019, but he's introduced the term descendental aesthetic ontology, not transcendental, but descendental. I've not read his book yet, the newest book. Then he also, his book, Physics of the World's Soul, Whitehead's Adventure in Cosmology, part of the studies in open and relational theology. And then this author who's working very much in this area, Catherine Keller, her book on the mystery, Discerning Divinity in Process. And then her earlier book, Cloud of the Impossible, Negative Theology and Planetary Entanglement. And by negative theology, she basically is saying, what do we do after we understand that theology is impossible? How do we, there's your paradox. To find ourselves in a planetary entanglement, let's say, as dear Marshall McLuhan was doing his best in 1967 to give us a few pointers, as he says, electrical circuitry has overthrown the regime of time and space and pours upon us instantly and continuously the concerns of all others. Time has ceased and space has vanished. That can be pretty frightening.
But it gave us Zoomland.
And not quite. It hasn't completely ceased and desisted.
Can we integrate disintegration? And as I said earlier, where I came to this morning was that rather than a Jungian notion, which is commonly stated and usefully stated, and you also stated that, how do we contain this? But as you say, not with any ordinary container.
It's not.
A processual container. Yes, David?
So yeah, to continue that thought in that line, process is the mode of operation. Process. It's disintegration and integration are the process itself. So reintegration and disintegration are happening simultaneously. And right now we have disintegration happening at a more rapid rate.
Planetary scale, accelerating.
At the moment. But we have to remember that reintegration is there. It's playing its own game. And the process must unfold. There's not a choice. The process must unfold. And this, I'm talking about not just world level, I'm talking about cosmic scale. It is, if you go and look, let's look at what JWST is telling us about the cosmology of the universe.
Yes.
This is what's happening. This is what's happening.
I think where Whitehead assists with Jung and others in the Jung world of discourse to speak of the transformation of the God image, Whitehead gives us some help there. So this is how that God image can indeed transmute. And this is how religion has a continuing role in human life.
By disintegrating?
And reintegrating too. Like I was hearing a connection between Whitehead and a theologian, Jürgen Moltmann, who wrote the Theology of Hope, which is a major work, but his major thesis is that the hope embedded in God is like an attractor beam, and it affects what's happening in the present. He would also say that the present also affects somewhat what's happening with God, but not as strongly as Whitehead. But what David is saying, that reintegrative process is very active. Moltmann would say that's the most active force in the world.
Yeah.
And things are gonna come back together after they're falling apart.
Right, oh, go ahead.
Well, is it necessarily humanistic, this Whitehead God? I mean, that, are we necessarily involved, or are we a part of the process of integration, reintegration, disintegration? But are humans privileged in the whole Whiteheadian philosophy? Or is it a more abstract movement that doesn't require us?
For Whitehead, the human reality has a function in the ultimate fulfillment of the divine process. And as he says very explicitly, and again, the further you go with Whitehead, the further you can go with Whitehead. If you're drawn into Whitehead's work. But as he says, even in terms of the individual, and I think this is a crucial point, he said, and again, but I'm not speaking his words now, I'm summarizing, any reckoning of cosmic reality that eliminates the individual trivializes reality.
And he would include individual beings apart from humans, though.
Correct.
Yeah,
Subjectivity pervades the cosmos.
even atoms.
Even at every actual occasion.
For subjectivity to be pervading the cosmos, I see very little personification in this group.
Subjectivity, you don't see subjectivity here?
I see some subjects, but I don't see anybody personifying anything really other than other people too much.
Well, that's too bad.
Except myself.
I don't know, I'd have to understand more the language you're using, since we don't have a perfect dictionary. What you mean by personifying or subjectivity, all these terms, I can't decode what you said.
God, I'm sure
God?
it would probably take, I'm sorry you can't decode what I said, because it would take a lot to decode it.
Well, we're willing, we're here every Thursday. That's why we're here every Thursday.
We're open to
To
having you give a
decode each other.
presentation on what you mean.
Well, and maybe I have misunderstood what you mean by subjectivity and its cosmic nature.
Yeah, I actually don't like the term subjectivity or objectivity. I'm with Steve. I don't, to me, subject-object dichotomy is pretty much an obsolete term, except for specific occasions. But it's still out there and it's still used. I don't see a division between subject and object. I'm very much with, who was it, Schrodinger? Or Bohr, or somebody who said an absolute barrier between subject and object has never existed. That's where I'm at.
Cannot exist.
Whitehead, again, so there's where, as I said earlier, the inflection of this language in 2024, to go back to how Whitehead is using his language. And at some point, will you come to say, well, I have a frisson with Whitehead's language. I can't go along with that language all the way with him, which we commonly encounter with Jung, and as Jung himself is saying, it is something perhaps to have gotten this far if it is not given to go further.
I'd like to tell a really short story. I'll make it short. But it's some entities that taught me something really beautiful. But they were fish. They were like only this big, you know, in their mind, their brain, you know, we think of them as very small and not, you know, maybe. But I raised these baby koi and I had them in a big tank at home, and they get too big and they need to go to a pond. And so I found a pond for them in the Salinas Hills with a family. And I took them up there, and they were like 4 inches long. And I guess this is about hope and entanglement too. So we let the fish go in the pond, and they were terrified. They swam all over, and they were extremely anxious, like you in the morning, and they darted everywhere, and they didn't know what to do with the universe. And there were other fish in the pond. There were like 5 other fish in the pond. One of the other fish came over to them, led them under a rock into a little cave. We were standing there watching this. Everybody was 4 inches long. They led them into a cave, and they had an orientation meeting.
Yeah.
They did. And then, so they stayed in there like a minute, 2 minutes. Then the other fish brought them all out and took them all around the pond. The pond was half the size of this room, I would say. And they were all calm, and they followed the other fish, and they went all around the pond. And to me, it was the same as reading about Father Zosima in Dostoevsky and in Brothers Karamazov. I was seeing the same thing. I was seeing like love in leadership, and hope happened for those fish, the terrified fish. They learned what they could learn that day. Then they would have to form community in the future, but it was just their smallness. They were ahead of me. They were ahead of me in their ability to love and show leadership. And
I like it.
Wonderful. Amen.
it was.
I have a question about your integration and your disintegration, the back and the forth of the process in which we've discussed at various levels this evening. Is that similar to like an evolution and de-evolvement to the opposites coming and going at the same time through the manifestation of these philosophical ideas?
If I've decoded you correctly, we always work here with polarities and tensions. Jung is always going to speak of the opposites. That our human situation is that we are born into a reality of opposites. How do we live through that? I'm not sure that was any answer at all.
That's,
I can help. I think, because it's partially an answer to what we were talking about earlier, is that on a personal level, and I can relate to this, what we're talking about on a larger.
Speak up, David.
I can relate to it on a personal level, is that part of my process in this life is disintegration, leading to, let's say, a dying to self, to the ego that I began life with, in the process of that changing, and into where I'm at now, which is still both a disintegration on things that I had known that are no longer of value. I wouldn't say not true, no longer of value, to a different state of consciousness. So that's my interpretation. Okay, I mean, they're from.
And then on a global or a larger community level,
Yeah,
global, this is something, but the constancy of those type of changes going on.
Transmutation here,
I was gonna ask, David, are you describing transmutation?
Well, yes,
Wow.
because that has to be in there, because there has to be some state there that I'm incapable of arriving on my own, that there has to be some higher consciousness that allows that to happen.
And I think part of what's happening is that each higher level incorporates within itself all the lower levels previous to it.
Huh?
So hopefully, the creative incorporates the destructive, but it's gonna be that's gonna be the leader.
So it's evolving.
Yes,
There's an
yes.
evolution and
Yeah.
de-evolution for things that are not, that are kind of in parity or in entropy and disharmony.
I'm noticing that everyone is making a movement with, not everyone, but two people are making a movement with their hands like this. That makes so much sense to me. It makes a lot of sense because the reintegration following the disintegration won't bring you back to the same place. You're not going around in a vicious circle. It's a spiral. I love that image of a spiral.
Yes.
A double helix.
well, I think we've done a reasonably good job with the philosophy of organism. And I'm glad all our hearts are beating and that our microbiomes are in contact. And, but we are after 9 o'clock, and so.
I would like to salute the gentleman, Paul. You have an exquisite, expressive voice, and I'm touched by it. Are you a singer? Do you do music?
No.
Wow.
I love music, but people run out of the room if I
Fantastic
touch
voice
something.
to hear you read, and I thank you for hearing it. It's magnificent.
It was on the telephone.
Thank you, I'm not aware of that, so.
Yeah, well, I was very aware.
Well, thank you all for being.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Namaste.
And I admire.
That was a great introduction to Whitehead, I think.
Did you,
Yeah, it
Really
was
great.
What did you think?
Thank you very much.
Yes. With all of your curiosities and your perspectives. It was.
Thank you for the fish story.
Yeah.
I said that about subjectivity. She told a story about fish being
Good
people
night, Zoom
too.
folks.
Thank you, that's exactly